Welcome to the channel, where real-life stories are told with emotion, truth, and sometimes righteous anger. If you've ever felt something was unjust, but didn't know how to speak up, then today's video might just hit home. Before we dive into the story, if you feel this content matters, hit subscribe and join us on this journey. And if it's not your thing, that's okay too. Just drop a 1 in the comments below, because whatever you feel, your voice deserves to be heard. I used to think the worst thing that could happen in a quiet neighborhood was someone overcooking burgers at a block party. But I was wrong, very wrong, because the worst thing happened on what should have been a perfectly normal afternoon, when my son was hit by an SUV, and the driver, none other than Karen, the self-appointed queen of the entire cul-de-sac. I was in the garage at the time, tightening a loose bolt on the lawn rake. Meanwhile, Timmy, my 10-year-old son, was doing what he loved most, riding his scooter around the cul-de-sac in endless loops, grinning from ear to ear with his helmet slightly crooked, because, as he said, it looks cooler this way. Then came the sound that split the world open. Tires screeching, a horn blaring, and then a gut-wrenching thud so heavy it felt like my heart exploded in my chest. I bolted out of the garage like lightning. What I saw took the breath from my lungs. Timmy crumpled on the pavement, his small body twisted unnaturally, as if someone had bent his limbs by hand. His scooter lay yards away, flung like a toy in a game he never agreed to play. Karen stood there, car door ajar, stammering, "He darted out!" I didn't see him, but I couldn't hear a thing. I dropped to my knees beside my son, my hands trembling as I reached for his tiny, convulsing shoulder. It wasn't the blood that terrified me. Not even my wife's broken sobs as she ran from the porch. What shattered me was Timmy's eyes full of guilt, as if he had done something wrong. I wanted to scream, to tear the sky open and shout to the world that my boy was just playing. He wasn't in the way. He didn't deserve this, especially not because of one woman's obsession with neighborhood compliance wrapped in a thin veil of personal vendetta. While my son lay on a stretcher, pale and shaking, Karen had already switched into victim mode. She was on the phone at the scene talking about filing an incident report with the HOA board, as if this was some minor liability issue, not a devastating blow to a child's body and innocence. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask if he was okay. She was too busy worrying about her reputation. And that's when I knew this had gone too far. This wasn't about misaligned patio furniture or sidewalk chalk drawings getting scrubbed off. This was war, and I, a father, wasn't going to let it end in silence. When we moved into Seabreeze Hollow, I truly believed it would mark the beginning of a peaceful new chapter. The house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, with a white picket fence, a lush green lawn, and that salty ocean breeze whispering through the windows every morning. My wife beamed as she unpacked boxes in the kitchen, and Timmy practically shouted with joy when he saw the wide, open street, perfect for endless scooter rides. I remember standing in the living room, taking it all in and thinking, this is it, the peace we've been dreaming of. At first, the neighbors seemed friendly enough. Retired men watering their lawns like they were training for the Olympic finals, elderly women tending to flower pots like they were priceless national relics. It was uneventful, almost boring, which is exactly what I wanted after years of city chaos. Until I met Karen. I didn't know her name at first. She was just the woman in the beige polo, sneakers so white they reflected sunlight, and a blinking Bluetooth headset that never seemed to be connected to anything. She came from across the street, handed me a stack of papers thick enough to rival a spaceship manual, offered a dry smile, and said, "Welcome to the Seabreeze community. I trust you've read the guidelines." I smiled politely. My wife thanked her. Timmy, wearing a hoodie with jam stains, waved. Karen didn't even look at him. Her eyes locked on me. Not with curiosity, but with calculation, like she was measuring whether I deserved to breathe the air on her street. I flipped through the packet. No toys on the lawn, no flags in windows, no sidewalk chalk drawings. I muttered to my wife, "Is there a part 2? We thought she was just detail-obsessed, but we were wrong. That attention to detail wasn't about order. It was about control. The next morning, Timmy was out riding his scooter, 6 minutes, tops. I hadn't even finished making coffee when I found a pink slip taped to our mailbox. Control your child. The HOA is watching. No name, no signature, just the chill of knowing someone had been watching us. From behind the curtains. Days later, I discovered that the oversight committee mentioned in the warning, it didn't exist. There was no board, just Karen, a printer, and a delusion that she was judge, jury, and executioner of Seabreeze Hollow. And the scariest part? She wasn't doing this for the community. She was doing it for power. When I looked at Timmy, just a boy who wanted to ride his scooter, laugh, and live, and realized he'd become the target of a power trip disguised as neighborhood order, I knew. This wasn't the dream neighborhood anymore. It was a battleground. And Karen, she was the one who lit the match for the nightmare we never saw coming. If power is an addiction, then Karen was deep in a high she never wanted to come down from. At first, I thought the rigid rules were just part of community life, a well-meaning effort to maintain order. But just a few weeks after moving into Seabreeze Hollow, I realized we weren't living in a neighborhood. We were living under the unofficial reign of a self-appointed enforcer. Karen didn't just follow the rules. She rewrote them in ways that served her. She wasn't the official HOA president. In fact, on paper, the Seabreeze Hollow HOA hadn't had a legitimate board in 5 years. But Karen exploited that vacancy, proclaiming herself the acting interim president, and formed a compliance committee consisting of herself and a laser printer. The first pink slip was just the beginning. Soon, our mailbox began to overflow with violation notices, all typed in Times New Roman, each stamped with a generic HOA logo that looked like it had been copy-pasted from Microsoft Word. The infractions were laughably absurd. Unregistered wheeled devices operated in the internal road zone. Outdoor activity frequency exceeds community thresholds. Scooter tilt angle poses collision risk. I remember holding one of the notices up and asking my wife, "Are we living in a neighborhood or an Air Force base?" Karen didn't even try to hide her surveillance. One afternoon, while collecting the mail, I caught her across the street, phone raised, lens aimed at Timmy, who was drawing a dinosaur with sidewalk chalk. When I approached and asked, "Are you recording my son?" she replied, completely unfazed, "I'm documenting behavior with potential legal implications." The way she said it, you'd think Timmy was handling radioactive waste, not dreaming up prehistoric creatures with a pack of Crayola chalk. I posted on the neighborhood forum, hoping for some shared outrage or even mild concern. Instead, I got responses from 3 anonymous accounts with names like Civic Watch and HOA Guard 72, one of which wrote, "Scooter Boy needs boundaries." Just like that, my 10-year-old son became a target. Not for what he did, but for daring to exist loudly in a world Karen wanted silent. With every passing day, Karen escalated. More warning signs, more anonymous letters. She even launched a newsletter titled Community Safety Bulletin, listing neighborhood children who had violated code, with Timmy at the top, accused of unsupervised recreational wheeled activity. She created an entire ecosystem of pretend authority where every giggle was a disruption and every dissenting parent was a threat to community stability. And that's when I understood. Karen didn't need an election. She only needed the silence of everyone else to turn herself into the law. I used to think Karen's antics were just annoying. The passive-aggressive notes, the judgmental stares, the vague 2 a.m. emails titled "For a Safer Community." But then it all shifted, from ridiculous to dangerous, from dangerous to a nightmare. It happened on a perfectly ordinary afternoon, the day Karen hit the gas and drove straight into my son. That day, the sky was unsettlingly calm. After weeks of being told to stay inside, Timmy was finally allowed out to ride his scooter. I gave him the usual warning. "Stay in sight. Don't go too far." He nodded, beaming. I turned back into the garage to tighten a few bolts when I heard the sound, a screech of tires, the kind that freezes your blood before you even turn around. I sprinted outside and found Timmy on the pavement, his small body curled in on itself as if trying to retreat from pain, and Karen, hands shaking, mumbling nonsense. He ran out. I didn't see him. I didn't have time. The SUV, sleek, black, still running, idled with the front door wide open and a faint smear of blood on the bumper, a silent accusation that needed no further explanation. My wife screamed, collapsing beside our son. But Karen? She didn't step forward, didn't ask if Timmy was okay, didn't even look at him. She pulled out her phone, dialed someone, and the first words out of her mouth weren't, "I'm so sorry," but, "I need to contact my HOA legal rep before rumors spread." That was the moment it all clicked. Karen wasn't someone who wanted to resolve conflict. She was someone who weaponized it. A woman who used rules as levers and catastrophe as an opportunity for control. When the police arrived, Karen walked up to them like a plaintiff, not a perpetrator. She didn't say, "I hit a child." She said, "I'm here to report a case of parental negligence." And then she turned to me with a half smile like a dagger and said, "You let your child play unsupervised, on the road. This is the consequence." That level of shamelessness shattered every worst-case scenario I had ever imagined. Timmy was still on a stretcher, barely breathing, and the woman who had just run him down was laying the legal groundwork to make me the criminal. And that was only the beginning. The very next day, a man wearing Bluetooth headphones and a fake smile knocked on my door, holding a golden envelope. "You're being sued," he said, "for damaging the HOA's reputation." I signed for it with a trembling hand, not from fear, but from the clarity that what Karen started with her SUV was a war, and the impact that broke my son's bones was just her opening shot. I sat on the front steps, the lawsuit envelope still clutched in my hand, my chest burning like someone had poured gasoline on my heart and struck a match. Karen hadn't just hit my son. She'd dragged my entire family into a legal war, casting me as the defendant and herself as the poor victim, backed by the community. But if Karen thought I'd just sit back and take it, she picked the wrong man. I started where no one ever looks, the HOA bylaws. The first time I read them, I thought they were written by a drunk lawyer and a failed poet. But buried in all the legal drivel was a detail Karen never expected anyone to notice. Every HOA board member's term lasts 1 year and must be renewed through an official election. The last election, 5 years ago. I didn't need to beat her emotionally. I just needed to prove one thing. Karen had no legal standing. She wasn't elected. She had no authority to issue citations, collect fees, or make rulings. Every notice, every fine, every official action, fake. I dug deeper. Permit requests for board meetings, forged signatures, minutes from said meetings, full of names that didn't exist, or worse, 2 listed members had been dead since 2019. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. Karen wasn't managing a community. She was directing a one-woman paper theater, a fake HOA propped up by intimidation, legalese, and unearned power. I compiled everything into a binder titled Operation HOACCURACY. But I knew that evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed a voice from inside the system. That's when I found Dale, the former HOA treasurer Karen had removed for budgetary disagreements. He took my binder, flipped through it in silence, then sipped his tea and nodded. This'll topple that plastic throne she's been sitting on. With Dale's help, I gained access to old financial records. One recurring line item stood out: KRS Solutions, $42,800, supposedly for landscaping, security services, and supplemental waste removal. The problem? No one had ever seen this company actually doing anything. I ran a background check, and my jaw dropped. KRS stood for Karen Rachel Simmons, her full name. Karen was paying herself through a company she owned for services that never existed. A miniature money laundering ring disguised as HOA operations, sealed in fancy envelopes and fake authority. I printed every document, filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general's office, and I countersued fraud, forgery, organized harassment. Karen wanted to make me an example, but I would make her a warning. And this was only the overture. The curtain was just rising. 2/2, I was well prepared. A case file nearly 100 pages thick, hardcover, neatly organized index, signature comparison sheets, financial statements, and verified witness testimonies. What I didn't expect was that the moment to present it all would happen right inside the stronghold of the person who built an entire fake empire, Karen's garage. The so-called emergency HOA meeting called by Karen took place on a Tuesday night. Metal folding chairs, a mini projector, bottled water, and, most suspicious of all, a tray of muffins labeled Unity Snacks. Dale and I sat in the back, silently observing. The air was thick with tension. Karen walked up like she was presiding over a military tribunal. She clicked her remote. First slide, persistent threats to community order. Second slide, a still photo of Timmy, caught mid-turn on his scooter, deliberately frozen to look like a chase scene. I stood up. I didn't wait for her accusation-filled speech to finish. I stepped up to the center table. The heavy case file dropped with a thud that silenced the room. Before we continue, I said, voice echoing through all four walls, I think everyone here should see this. Karen froze. She walked up, flipping through the first few pages. When she reached the signature comparison section, her hands began to shake. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. I didn't answer. That's when Dale fired up the secondary projector. On the wall appeared the HOA financial expenditure chart, line after line of transactions leading to KRS Solutions, a company owned by Karen herself. Each transfer was authorized, with her own signature. There was no way out. Karen, Linda, the soft-spoken elderly neighbor, finally spoke. "Is this real?" Karen let out a brittle laugh. "You've all been tricked. This is a personal attack, a smear campaign." I cut in, firm. "You faked your leadership title, took unauthorized payments, forged meeting records, and set up a shell company to siphon funds from this community. This isn't a conspiracy. This is evidence." Karen's voice cracked like glass. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" I replied, "No. But it stops you from turning this neighborhood into your personal property." No one defended her. No one stood to protect her. Karen grabbed her bag, stumbled into the muffin table, knocked over a chair, and stormed out of the garage like someone whose mask had just been torn off. The next day, I thought it was over, but Karen wasn't done. A new paper appeared taped to my door. Defamation lawsuit. Plaintiff, Karen Rachel Simmons. She was no longer trying to reclaim power. Now she was trying to destroy anyone who dared to challenge it. I thought I had reached the end of the battle, but it turned out everything so far had only been the opening act. 3 days after Karen filed her lawsuit for defamation of HOA reputation, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was low, calm, and deliberate. "You're Grant, right? This is Agent Reyes from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We'd like to meet." We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop outside town, far enough to avoid nosy neighbors, but close enough for me to return quickly if Karen tried to pull another stunt. Reyes wore a black suit, no name tag, carrying only a slim folder. But the way he looked at me, precise, cold, told me he knew everything, and more. "The documents you submitted to the Attorney General have reached us," he said, flipping gently through the files I had sent out 2 weeks prior. But what triggered our investigation wasn't just the forged signatures or shady financial reports. It was the company name, KRS Solutions. I raised an eyebrow slightly. "Karen didn't just pull this off in Seabreeze Hollow," Reyes said, sliding a list across the table to me. 3 other neighborhoods, 3 different states, all the same pattern. A fake HOA, a set of irrational rules, and a company formed by Karen to siphon money from residents under the guise of maintenance, security, and lifestyle enhancement. She's been running this scheme for nearly a decade, and now, thanks to you, we have enough to shut it down. I sat in silence for a moment. It felt like I had just stumbled not into a personal feud, but into a multi-state web of fraud. "We need you to keep doing what you're doing," Reyes continued. "Keep showing up to the meetings. Keep pushing back. Keep speaking out like you're just trying to protect your own child, because Karen is wobbling. And when people like her see their power slipping, they often confess more than any investigator could ever dig out." I nodded, not because I thought I was a hero, but because I finally understood. The truth I uncovered no longer belonged just to me. It was the submerged tip of an iceberg, and if no one had the courage to look straight at it, entire communities would be swallowed in silence and manipulation. That night, when I returned home, something had changed. No more fear, no more doubt, only one clear resolve. If Karen was the face of deception, then I would be the voice of truth. I used to think, if there was one person I could trust in this fight, it was Dale, the man who always carried a jug of lemonade the size of a full HOA meeting, the one who helped patch my roof after the storm tore off half the shingles, and the first to stand beside me in exposing Karen. But trust, I've learned, is the easiest thing to distort when fear starts to seep into a community. That morning, a video suddenly appeared on the neighborhood forum, not from me, not from Karen, but from an anonymous account labeled Neighbor Protect 2. The clip was secretly recorded, a conversation between me and Dale in his garage. We were talking about documents, about strategy, about how to bring the truth to light. But the audio had been edited, the words twisted out of context, and through some clever and malicious splicing, the video made us look like we were orchestrating an uprising, a so-called HOA coup, as the sensational headline read. Within hours, the post had dozens of comments, shares, and, of course, suspicion. Some neighbors began looking at me, not as the one fighting against Karen, but as the root of the chaos. I wasn't angry, I was hurt, but clear-headed enough to know only one person could have recorded that clip. I went straight to Dale's house. He opened the door like he'd been expecting me. No greeting, no explanation. I said only one sentence. "You sent the video." Dale didn't deny it, just exhaled. "She came to see me," he said. "Karen, she said she'd drop the lawsuit, walk away from everything, if I helped her regain control of the narrative." My chest tightened. "You saw the forged signatures, the documents, the spending reports. You know I did this to protect the truth, not to fabricate a story." Dale didn't meet my eyes. "I also see a whole neighborhood that's scared, tired." She said, "If we made you the villain, maybe things would calm down. At least, go back to being quiet." I looked at the man who once called my son Champ, who once clapped me on the shoulder and said, "We're going to tear down that plastic throne of hers." And now, he was the one who opened the back door for Karen to walk back into the war. "You sat at my table, ate my wife's pie, watched my son cry after being humiliated, and now you turn your back." My voice wasn't angry anymore. It was cold. Dale said nothing. I turned away, but before stepping off the porch, I looked at him one last time. "You didn't just side with Karen. You betrayed your own conscience." That morning began with barking dogs and a strange silence hanging over the entire street. I was brushing my teeth when I heard engines roar like a scene out of an action movie. By the time I ran out to the front porch, my heart nearly stopped. 5 black SUVs slid down the road like ghosts, stopping right in front of Karen's house. Men in bulletproof vests, earpieces, and full tactical gear, the feds had arrived. It was as if the film we had all been living, of truth and lies, was finally reaching its climax. Karen was dragged out of her front door wearing a thin bathrobe, messy hair, oversized sunglasses, covering half her face. But no amount of makeup could hide the panic in her eyes. She screamed, "I'm the HOA president. This is illegal." One of the agents replied, stone cold, "No, ma'am. You are the subject of a federal fraud investigation." The entire neighborhood held its breath. People who used to turn away when I walked by were now gathered on lawns, phones held high, recording every second of a morning no one would forget. Karen kicked, shouted, claiming she was being framed, that the enemy was destroying her reputation and the community she built. But no one believed her anymore. She wasn't the one in power. She was a handcuffed defendant. Reyes, the same federal agent who had once met with me at that quiet cafe, stepped forward and handed me a copy of the arrest warrant. The charges were clear: financial fraud, forgery, tax evasion, and abuse of HOA authority. Next to the final line were 3 key pieces of evidence, all traced back to the files Dale and I had submitted. Ironically, Dale, the one who betrayed me, had moved away in silence just 2 days earlier. No goodbye. No one missed him. News spread like wildfire. By noon, local news stations had tents set up outside Karen's home. By evening, national headlines were calling her the fallen queen of the HOA. But the lesson wasn't just for Karen. It was for everyone who had once chosen silence over speaking out. Those who once thought, "This doesn't concern me." They had now seen what happens when one ordinary person dares to challenge a system built on fear. Karen pled guilty. She was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, 5 years probation, and a lifetime ban from holding any position in any HOA nationwide. The house once seen as her seat of power was sold quickly. No farewell, no flowers, no sign out front. She disappeared from Seabreeze Hollow like a nightmare finally ended. And I, once labeled the troublemaker, now simply stand on my porch, watching Timmy draw with chalk on the sidewalk, and smile. The story of a father who stood up to a fraudulent HOA system to protect his son, and in doing so, exposed an entire network of community manipulation, is not just an everyday hero's tale. It is a powerful reminder of the value of awareness, courage, and the power of truth in a world that's growing more complex and filled with unaccountable authorities. One of the first and most striking lessons from this story is the silence of the majority can enable wrongdoing to thrive. No one in the neighborhood initially dared to confront Karen, even though they all sensed something was off in how she operated. That passivity left a void, one she filled with printed papers and fear, building an empire of control without any formal authority. It reflects a reality we see too often. When truth is avoided, falsehood becomes the default rule. Secondly, the story teaches us the strength of conviction in the face of injustice. The father wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't an activist. He was simply a man trying to shield his son from absurdity. But through love, frustration, and integrity, he became the one who stepped into the light, to investigate, to gather evidence, and to take on an entire system. In real life, we don't need to have power to create change. We just need to refuse to give up. Third, the story warns us about the danger of unchecked authority. Karen represents a type of person that can exist anywhere. Someone who seizes control of rules for personal gain, rules through fear, and disguises self-interest in the name of community good. The lesson isn't just to avoid people like Karen, but to learn how to recognize and challenge them with the law, with truth, and most importantly, with unity. And finally, perhaps the most touching lesson comes from Timmy, a child who just wanted to ride his scooter and draw dinosaurs. His innocence reminds us that every fight for justice begins with something simple, the desire to preserve what is good. Whether it's a piece of chalk, a smile, or a small pathway, when someone tries to take it away, we must find the courage to take it back. The story ends with justice, but the lessons continue. And in every community, in every person, there's always a choice: to remain silent or to speak up for what's right. If you've stayed with us until now, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to witness a story that isn't just about a father, but about resilience, about the thin line between freedom and control. If this story made you think, moved you, or even made you angry, please hit the like button, share the video to help spread the message, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more powerful true stories like this one. We want to hear from you. What concerns you the most? Who did you resonate with? Leave a positive or critical comment, because every perspective matters, and your voice is part of the conversation that brings us closer to justice.